Happy Africa Day to our brothers and sisters around the continent and to you around the globe watching us via live stream. Good evening and welcome to you. This is Africa News Network. My name is Cindy Mabi. Our top story at 6:30 Central African Time. Government says retailers should move sweets from their checkout points, saying this will help consumers make healthier food choices. The call comes after retailer Woolworths removed sweets at tills from up to 60% of its stores. The call for more healthy eating options was made by the Health Department's Linda Moeng. Addressing Parliament this week, the Chief Director for Health Promotion, Nutrition and Oral Health explained how Woolworths removed sweets from its checkout aisles in 60 of its stores. Moeng called on all retailers to follow suit. Let's listen in to what our viewers had to say about the government proposal for healthier eating habits.
It is part of the food and it is one of the delectables that we are used to eat from the olden times. But from that time till now, the time has brought us to a certain point in a lifestyle where things are getting up completely mixed up.
And I'm in the queue, I'm very tempted to pick up a packet of sweets. So yes, I think definitely, and I think mums will be very happy too.
Sweets are very more important. You can't live without sweets.
Let's take a look at some of the arguments for and against such a move. The argument in favor says removing sweets from checkout aisles will curb consumption, but the argument against says removing sweets from checkout points amounts to censorship. And according to statistics, 2/3 of women and 1/3 of men in South Africa are overweight, but are sweets or sugar the only driver of obesity in the country? Experts say government regulation is needed to curb unhealthy food consumption, but better awareness can help consumers make more informed choices.
Having sweet treats and chocolates at the checkout aisle obviously increases the temptation for us to buy them when we probably wouldn't have shopped for them at all. It's also true for children, so often sweet treats are at their eye level, and while getting restless standing in the long queue, they will more likely ask for what they see in front of them. Both diabetes and hypertension are chronic diseases which can be prevented or managed with diet and lifestyle. So uncontrolled diabetes or a prolonged high blood glucose can result in damage to the eyesight, nerves such as in our feet, and it can also progress to kidney failure. And then hypertension or high blood pressure is often a silent killer with not many symptoms. Sweets and chocolates are full of what we call empty calories. They contain very little nutrients or very little vitamins. But then obviously they provide calories which contribute to weight gain. A healthy snack should rather be one that contains nutrients and vitamins and not just calories. So some examples could be things like unsalted nuts, dried or whole piece of fruit, salted popcorn, even things like cheese cubes, veggie sticks or an unsweetened yogurt. It's never too late to change bad habits, and no change is too small to have a positive effect in the long term on your health.
And joining us live on the phone line, Tanya Alberts, a nutritionist and dietitian. We have Adrian Richards, a retail buyer expert. Good evening to you and thanks so much for joining us. Tanya, just from a nutritional point of view, in terms of consumption habits of South Africans when it comes to fast food, instant gratification and sweets, we hear that 2/3 of South African women are obese. So clearly this is a health hazard.
Good evening, Cindy. Thank you for letting me join you this evening. I agree that sweets and treats definitely need to be removed from the aisles, and we're sitting today with an obesity epidemic. And unfortunately, that epidemic has moved to our children as well. And because children are influenced at a very, very early age what to do, what to eat, and how to behave, they normally go for things that they see their peers are taking. They go for foods that they see advertised on television, social media, internet. And they take these foods or these habits that they learn as young children and they carry them through to adulthood. And a lot of them also develop emotional eating from this, which is a huge problem in South Africa because that also contributes to the obesity epidemic. And going to courses for emotional eating and helping on that, teaching parents how to teach their children what to eat and what better choices to make will definitely in the long term have a huge influence on our youth.
And how well advanced, sorry Tanya, how well advanced are we in terms of information or making informed choices as consumers, or have we just become habitual consumption or rather consumers without necessarily interrogating what it is that we consume?
Because we are influenced by social media, by retail companies advertising, everywhere in bright colors with different claims, we are not very well informed on that, and people aren't visiting dietitians enough to actually become informed and educated on what is healthy eating, the basics of healthy eating. And also, whole foods aren't being advertised. Why aren't they advertising whole foods as the foods that they need to be eating? Because
Sorry, Tanya, let's get a response from Adrian Richards. He's a retail buyer expert. Adrian, thanks so much for your time. I mean, is this going to change or rather censor retailers as the counter argument to this government proposal is?
Look, Cindy, good evening and to the viewers. The biggest problem in retail is it's a highly contested space, especially from a supplier point of view, and there are toll point agreements, additional income and revenue. Suppliers pay a lot of money to be positioned there. I completely agree with the dietitian. I think what needs to be done firstly is more proper information must be fed to the parents at school level. The kids must be taught good eating, healthy habits, etc. Moving the sweets from the toll point shouldn't be an issue, because if people who really want chocolates, they'll go and look for it down the aisle. So I think it's a positive move, and hopefully it will help reduce obesity and the long-term effects that people will gain in the future if they do not stop.
Yeah, but do you think this will also encourage a more aggressive marketing campaign from manufacturers of sweets and sweet beverages to attract consumers? In the sense, there's some arguments that chocolate gives you the same feeling as if you were in love, kind of thing. So do you think this will see more aggressive marketing?
Certainly it would. They'll definitely drive, especially we all know consumption of chocolate is much higher in winter because of that exact feeling. It gives you that emotional, feeling and the enjoyment that you want. But going forward, we just need to look at the kind of marketing campaigns that they're looking to do, that they're not specifically, targeting kids, using kids in a chocolate advert or a sweets advert. They got to try and convince consumers on other triggers instead of just using those kind of imagery for kids to think that is the ideal sweet or product. I mean, at the toll point, you should be having your dry fruits, your nuts, all the healthy options, water, and no sugary things.
Yeah. Let's just bring Tanya back in terms of consumer awareness around this point, as opposed to denying those that indulge in comfort foods or even fast food for that matter. Do you think that the government intervention will perhaps stifle a business and even smaller players coming into the industry?
Very important that the government does play a huge role in this, because as most retail companies will argue, but why aren't parents educating their children to eat better and make better choices? Unfortunately, the parents are competing against huge retail companies. They're competing against social media. They're competing against adverts on television, and it will be a battle that they can't win if we don't have a health awareness campaign of what should children be eating to be healthy? How should we be feeding our children so that they can have sustainable energy, so that they can have more focus in class, so that they will actually make the right choices? Because in empowering them to make healthy choices will, in the end, as adults, help them to also combat things like obesity, chronic disease, lifestyle diseases. And those are things that are becoming a serious problem in our country.
Yeah, but is there a balance though? Sometimes sweets are used as a treat when a child has achieved a particular task. Is there a balance to say, it is good now and again when you go to a birthday party or whatever it is, but it shouldn't be something that forms part of your grocery list every month?
Children shouldn't be rewarded with sweets, and children shouldn't be rewarded with treats, because then they develop that habit of, okay, if I'm good or if I'm sad or if I'm happy or if I'm angry, then I'm going to go for something sweet. And people then develop emotional eating where they develop a bond with this food to give them comfort. We should rather reward with other structures like taking them for walks or buying them a dog or, basic things, not just food. We should never reward with food. But yes, at parties, if children want to eat at parties, sweets and things like that, it's fine. But we as parents should also provide them with healthier choices at parties. We should never restrict them from not having sweets, because then children can actually start eating in secret, or they might binge on sweets. So it's definitely having a balance between when to give a treat and what type of treats we give, but never rewarding with food.
All right, please stay on the line, Tanya and Adian. We have Silas Hermans. He's a chairperson for Tshebedisano Support Network. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Hermans. And just your contribution to this debate, the regulation around the sugar tax, and now we're seeing a call for retailers to be more responsible. Does the diet issue rest with retailers, government, and parents as a collective, or should it be more regulated?
Thank you for inviting me on this topic. My subject of concern around this issue of the sugar and obesity and all of these things that are coming up in our space, the challenges that we are starting to face as a country. We as communities are being neglected. We are being treated as if we are sort of animals that are in a laboratory that one would be controlling in terms of deciding on our behalf. The issues that are pertinent to our lives. Yes, there is an issue around obesity and all of these other aspects that are affecting our life, but the reality, why is it that communities are not invited on the table where campaigns are being driven in communities that are, affected, where education is being intensified every day? Because my concern around this issue of obesity is not for us to be taxed. That won't even give a solution to the challenges at hand, because the reality of the matter is that the very communities that are affected on daily basis, there is a need to do a lifestyle audit where we are able to verify why the problem at hand, why the challenges that we are facing as a nation. Because if you go to countries such as UK, I've been observing in one of the programs on one of the DSTV channels. There's a program where there's a doctor and a couple of his colleagues. They go into a shopping complex where they.
I'm afraid we seem to have lost Silas. Are you still there? Okay.
I'm still here.
Now, Silas, but the whole thing, the over-reliance on government to initiate programs and to deal with societal issues over and above the policy mandate that they have, shouldn't you as NGOs, NPOs and other foundations galvanize and yourselves and then approach sponsorship, be it corporate and even government involvement?
You see, as NGOs, we are people that are in touch with communities on the ground, and we are willing to do most of the work where we conscientize the communities around and educate them on what is essential for them to be able to know on how to survive. Now, the big challenge here is that the key role player, when the Ministry of Health is doing its own way of trying to bulldoze on such issues where they do not, if there was a round table where all of us are sitting in that table, we then determine what is the challenge at hand. How do we address all of these things? Believe you me, we could be finding solutions within our space. Because I'll tell you, in a country like South Africa, we have the traditional healers as one of the components. How many times have I ever seen government embarking on a drive where they are able to utilize such institutions, because there are those communities that don't have medical facilities nearer to them.
Silas, please just stay on the line. We have Tanya Alberts, a dietitian, and Adian Richards, retail buyer expert, on the line. Tanya, just your concern regarding the approach, the top-down approach, as heard from the NGO Tshebedisano Support Network, that it is an experiment. It's rather something that is imposed on communities without really understanding the underlying issues as to why people have a particular, lifestyle patterns, as it were.
it will definitely help if the NGOs can also put in their input. If we can develop school programs where we educate children from a very young age what to eat, how to eat, but also educate the parents. Currently, I'm busy doing an emotional eating course where we invite parents to come and learn how to teach their children how to eat, and also how to overcome their own emotional eating from different snack foods, from these retail foods, because most of the foods that are processed foods that we get today are very high in sugar, they're very high in fats, and they're very high in salt. And consuming those type of foods on a regular basis in high doses have shown to lead to chronic disease of lifestyle.
All right, Adrian, how retailers may reposition themselves or in terms of the shop layout to attract the buying power of consumers. The conversation, though, at the dinner table at home with children regarding healthier eating habits and not falling prey to their tantrums at the till point, and you try to avoid an embarrassing situation and you give in. How do we then educate kids that or people that generally would have an unhealthy lifestyle to wean themselves off it?
Got to be a collective from the Department of Health, from schools, from at home as well. Parents need to get a lot of information. They got to, whether they read Tim Noakes' book, understand the dangers that sugar is now one of the major causes of long-term illnesses, diabetes, etc. And it's ultimately going to end up costing the government. So we need to intervene now while we can and get the kids on a healthy space, get them into activity, sport, teach them that fruits and vegetables are the best for them, dry fruit snacks or, biltong, those kind of things, obviously with not sugar on or salt in it. I think that's going to be key. We need to limit, remove the sweets from the till points, put magazines, put books, put anything, put dry fruit, nuts. Those are the important things, I think, going forward.
All right, just stay on the line, please, Adrian. We have Dr. Terence Komal, a medical expert. Dr. Komal, thanks so much for your time. Should the diet burden be put on retailers or government, or are we as consumers obviously responsible for our own habits and hang-ups and all sorts of things?
I do believe there needs to be some input or cooperation from the retailers in terms of how products are positioned. But I think the final responsibility and accountability of what is included remains a responsibility, in my mind, on the government itself. I think the challenge is, and I just caught the tail end of my esteemed colleague's comments about things like fruits and juices and dried fruits, etc., if I remember them correctly. The issue with those such substitutes that are perceived to be healthier needs to be seen in the context that a lot of fruit juices and dried fruits do have artificial sweeteners used to make them palatable after an extended period. Now, as I raised, and I think this conversation started early this morning with your channel, the reality is we need to start looking at the realities of what we call glycemic index and glycemic load as opposed to sugar content. Because different food types lead to different responses by the body. And that again is compounded by the fact that different individuals with different health needs and or health concerns respond differently to each food type. So I think there needs to be a far wider reach than just saying chuck the chocolates at the till because the kids may be unhealthy, but you take them home and give them bread and other processed carbohydrates, which themselves are full of a range of products that are used to enhance the texture, the longevity, and the quality of those wheat-based products. The reality is, for example, wheat itself is brown. But when you refine it and buy white bread, nobody asks what was done in this process from a chemical perspective that may affect my health in the entire production process of these products. Now, I need, and that's the understanding for me, is I need government to give us a broader input of saying, what are we doing to regulate the food production process as opposed to what's being sold? And that is where the accountability is, because in my mind, the CPA prescribes that the producer Not the retailer, but the producer needs to list what's included. Now, a crude example, with no offense to a particular industry, is if I buy a loaf of bread out of a particular store, I would have logically needed to find wheat, yeast, oil, and water, and a bit of baking to make that happen. But when you see a paragraph of additional supplements or additives and or chemicals, it then begs the question, what are we buying? A wheat product or a chemical composition based on wheat? And that is where the health concern needs to focus on, is what happens in the processing and the production, as opposed to the guy that places it on the shelf and says, this is available, help yourself.
All right, so you're saying that we should go more organic, but a lot of people do not have access to organic food markets, for example, and the corner store, the spaza shop is the only other point where you can purchase basic amenities.
I think the reality is not saying organic, because organic has now become a new fad phrase of saying less chemicals. It doesn't mean no chemicals. Now, the reality is when food is being produced, there's no disclosure of that entire process. For example, sugar has an additive called bone meal or bone white that's used to whiten the sugar, remove the browning, which is an additional refining process. Nobody explains that that particular sugar product has been refined to such an extent that it may have health implications. So the reality is not just the sugar itself, but the processing that needs to be explained. So it's not just saying organic. It's saying explain the process that was involved and then explain what are the implications of that particular food grouping. Because again, I think my colleague had mentioned, Professor Tim Noakes, and I'm a subscriber to the science as opposed to the individual. The science then that he proposes or advocates, which wasn't his research, ironically, but international research, that says it's the type of carbohydrate and not a carbohydrate itself that's the problem. So we need to then monitor the food groupings, and that's a policy decision, not just saying, well, organic or not organic, or chocolate or not chocolate, because I'm convinced eating poorly developed carbohydrates or 5 slices of bread for a dinner meal will do far more harm to a child in the long term as opposed to a chocolate that gets processed very quickly, purely by nature of exactly the type of sugar or the product that's being consumed itself.
All right, stay on the line, please, Dr. Kamal. We have a caller, Des in Johannesburg. Good evening to you. Happy Africa Day. What's your comment or question?
Good evening. Good evening. I've been listening to all the comments and. Yeah. Good evening. I've been listening to all the comments made with regards to the health issues and awareness and etc. But we're not looking at the pricing structure of goods that are sold. If you look at the community, the people that can afford a healthy snack, you pay 10 Rand for a 125 gram chocolate bar, but you'll only get about 25 grams of mixed nuts in that. So that is a huge concern because we can only afford the cheap items which do have the higher content of sugar.
All right, Des, point well made. Thanks indeed. Tanya, maybe you can respond to that. Is it a fuss, or rather maybe Adrian, in the sense that a healthier lifestyle tends to be more costly?
That's a factual statement. It's much more costly to be healthy in this country. Unfortunately, the price of nuts, the price of healthy foods, if you look at the Banting diet, the menus that you have to put together, and like the doctor says, it's the groups or the categories which you got to choose. Those are expensive products that you need to purchase, and the sweets and that cheaper offerings that obviously kids with a 5 Rand can get a small bar of chocolate. They're not going to spend 5 Rand on a lettuce or anything.
All right, thanks so much, Adrian. And Dr. Kamal, just final word from you. If a healthier lifestyle adjustment is so costly, how then can we encourage communities to live healthier?
I think encouraging the communities is for them to understand the long-term implications of those choices. And I fully agree that what is perceived as healthier foods is expensive at the moment. But that's not a challenge or a problem that needs to be dealt with purely by the consumer. But this is a policy decision that the Department of Health and the other related departments need to intervene, because it's purely a simple decision. The decisions of the types of food made available cheaply are commercial decisions by entities driven to sustain that model. It's not about sustaining people. As much as there's a professing by the industry that they want to do healthier living, it's like the argument of putting a label on a bottle of alcohol and say alcohol causes harm. The issue is not that you're telling us. The issue is the alcohol itself. So in food groupings, there needs to be a conscious decision between economics and purely the long-term implication. But industry has very little consideration in the context of what can be done for the consumer, when it clearly may affect their bottom line and profitability. And that's a decision that the multifaceted departments need to consider, whether it be trade and industry or health or combination of those parties, because at the end of the day, the bulk of our health burden lies on the taxpayer, which makes it my problem, your problem, and the rest of the country. Because we directly and or indirectly foot the bill for our fellow citizens who bear the burdens of economic decisions that may or may not necessarily be to the benefit.
Much appreciated, Dr. Kamal and Adrian Richards. We had Silas Hermans, a chairperson for the Tshebedisano Support Network Group. Tanya Alberts is a dietitian, and Adrian Richards, a retail buy expert. And thanks for the calls. We take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.